For loading time this week, we're going to do something a little bit different. When we shot the video Occupied, it was on a Friday and we didn't have an extra person around to actually shoot a loading time video. But recently on Twitter we asked you if there was anything that we haven't really gone in depth on in an episode of Loading Time that you'd like to see more of. And a couple people said they'd like to see how the videos are edited. So I'm going to show you what I did on this week's video and also this week's checkpoint, because they're very different monsters. The first step in the process is bringing all the files into Final Cut, and in this case we're using Final Cut X, which is the newest version, and one of the big advantages to doing that is that it lets us automatically sync video and audio, because as you will have seen in previous loading times, the person using the boom has a separate audio recorder that they record all the sound to, and then we have to sync that up with the video. What that allows us to do is get much better, cleaner audio. Through the years we've used onboard audio and then a mic plugged directly into the camera and then a mic running through a ridiculous hackneyed setup of an iPod playing a tone in one ear to flatten the level so the other one's all clean. This is by far the best audio setup we've had, but it does add an extra step to the process because for every single shot there's two files that I need to join. So what I have here is a synchronized clip, and if I break the items in it apart, what comes up is this is the video with the sound from the camera, and separately the audio from the boom. Which, if I disable, the audio sounds like this normally.
Are you peeing against the wall? The bathroom's right there!
So you can hear that that sounds sort of quiet and echoey, but if I completely reduce that audio and turn on the audio from the boom...
Are you peeing against the wall? The bathroom's right there!
It's much cleaner, much nicer because we're using an actual proper microphone. In a video that's mostly sort of single shots, just jump cutting from one to the next, there was at least one, like slightly tricky edit, which is near the end when Paul comes in. Because the bathroom was so small, we couldn't get the same angle that we wanted on James and then also swing up to Paul, so there's actually a cut in there. You probably noticed it, it's not really a big deal, but I can show you how I did that. So here's the shot of James about to drink bleach. As it goes by, you can actually see Kathleen standing there with the boom, and just sort of, I just whip the camera out. Similarly, when Paul comes in, the shot starts roughly on James. It's a similar shot, but not quite the shot we needed. And then I whip into the shot of Paul. And then the way that we connect that is by picking an area that looks pretty similar in the whip. In this case, I'm using that towel sort of as a reference. And I'm going to start Paul's clip on that point. And I'm going to end James's clip on, say, that point. And the final result.
Jim? Jim? Jesus, what happened to you?
Some of editing is obviously technical, but some of editing is also, I guess you could say, artistic, and it's selecting when is the right time to make a cut. For the shot of James in the bubble bath, he went on for a while, because Andy's instruction in the script was until it stops being funny. And I don't know that it necessarily did stop being funny, but you can't sort of let that go for a really long amount of time, so choosing when to cut that shot off was really important.
I'm the wise old bubble man. What has brought you to my secret lair? You wish for a pot of gold, do you? Do I look like a leprechaun? No. Bubble wise man, bitch.
At the beginning of De Rutabaga in this video, there's a shot of the floor tiles, and because no one was talking in that, there was no need for audio, we didn't actually record separate special audio, and it meant that the only audio we have is just some people talking in the other room. And so I, of course, removed that audio entirely, but you'd be surprised how people notice a complete lack of audio. So I had to grab some what's called room tone from elsewhere in that scene and just sort of put it under there so that it didn't sound like there was nothing happening. We actually did an entire video about room tone that I think maybe a fifth of our viewership got, because in retrospect it's kind of an obscure thing. So there's this shot of James here where he's not actually saying or doing anything, and I grabbed a clip of that, and this one that I have soloed here, you can listen to it. And it's basically nothing, it's just some background noise, but without it, that shot looks really strange. Something interesting I encountered in this is that at the beginning of the video when James has his first line of internal monologue, he's looking away from camera and it's theoretical that he could have actually just been saying that line, and then when he turns around to camera and isn't talking, it looked weird. So what I did is I put a reverb on the monologue voice, as you frequently do when you hear someone's internal monologue. But I didn't want that for the whole video. So he only has the sort of reverb internal monologue for the first couple shots, and then when it moves on to sort of like when he says the first day, he says day 2, then there's no reverb gone, because then it's like he at that point it's moved from an internal monologue to him actually narrating his own story.
What the hell? Huh. Well, my phone's in the living room, and Chris just went to the movie.
See, it seems totally weird. So put the reverb on it.
What the hell? Huh. Well, my phone's in the living room.
And it makes sense. James's bathroom worked really well for this because there's a second door to it that goes through as like an ensuite, and so I could stand sort of in there and you could see the whole bathroom. But there's also a giant mirror, so some of the shots were a little more difficult than others. Nice. And that's basically the technical process for editing a Loading Ready Run video. Obviously, with other videos, there's a lot more involved in making the right cuts. When things have shoulder shots, you've got to make sure when you're cutting from one person to the other so that the continuity of where their heads are lines up, or cutting slightly before a line is done so you can see more of a reaction from the person you're cutting to, when to cut from a close shot to a wide shot to greater establish what's going on in the scene. But overall, that's the sort of the basic process. And then when we export, we send it out a final cut through a program called Compressor, which will send out the final high-res version and the compressed lower version to send to the escapist at the same time, which is nice and handy. Checkpoint is a completely different sort of thing because there's not a lot of difficulty in the editing from one shot to another. It's just sort of a series of Kathleen and I exchanging talking heads, but there's a lot of other different layers and effects that get added on to Checkpoint that make it totally different from a standard Loading Ready Run video. For every normal anchor shot in Checkpoint, you'll have the video layer, the template graphics, the text for the lower third, the text for the title of the story, the graphics for the story, and finally what's called the logo bug in the bottom right hand corner, which I've actually forgotten to add on 2 episodes and no one's mentioned. As the editor, it also means I'm sort of last line of defense on things like the lower thirds and the story names, and sometimes when we're writing we'll put down a lower third that's too long, and then I'll have to change it in the edit to make sure that it actually fits without reducing the text size too much. So for this Andrew Lloyd Webber story, there used to be one of the lower thirds said, "So what, are singing and dancing not careers?" which it was too long, so I changed it to the more news-like sounding "singing, dancing, not careers?" And there's usually 1 or 2 lower thirds each week that have to be altered to fit in the space. Lower thirds is the term for the text at the bottom of the screen. I may not have explained that earlier. Most of the overlay graphics over myself or Kathleen is just a still image, but when it needs to connect from one of us to the other, there's this very, very brief little animated section, which has just 1 frame in the middle where the red dot covers the entire screen, and that's where the cut happens. Basically, Checkpoint might not be the most challenging edit we do, but it's certainly one of the most fiddly. There's just lots of little things here and there to change and get right, and we know where is this transition from one lower third to the next going to happen to make it correctly flow with the dialogue that's being said, and so that's how Checkpoint is done. When it comes right down to it, everything that we edit is different and has its own challenges. When a video has a lot of special effects, there's a lot of different things to do there. If it's an episode of Commodore Hustle, it's a lot longer and there's a lot of dialogue shots. If it's something like an episode of Johnny, then it's a much easier edit because it's only about 4 or 5 sort of long shots. But hopefully this has answered more questions than it has created. And if you do have any further questions, hit me up on Twitter. I'll free to answer any of your editing queries, and maybe we'll do some other loading time looks at post-production in the future. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this one. Alright, how was the bubbles?
They're fun. Bubbles are fun.